What happens when prejudice takes flight at 30,000 feet? On Skyline Airways Flight 411, a simple request, just a medically necessary meal, became the spark that ignited a battle of dignity, power, and survival. Caleb Harris, a calm and quietly powerful CEO, sat in first class, expecting the respect due to any human life. Instead, he faced cold suspicion, dismissal, and a refusal that threatened not just his comfort but his very survival. How could a veteran flight attendant deny a man his life-saving meal? What happens when those charged with care become gatekeepers of prejudice? As the cabin's sterile air thickened with tension, Caleb's quiet strength forced a reckoning that would ground the entire flight and expose deeper issues of racism, entitlement, and corporate complicity. Who will stand up when the system fails? How far will one man go to protect his right to live with dignity? Join us as we dive into this gripping true story of courage and justice, soaring above the clouds where the cost of silence can be deadly. If this story moves you, don't forget to hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life dramas with unforgettable lessons. Now, let's begin. The New Haven International Airport buzzed with the usual mixture of excitement and exhaustion, the kind of low hum that comes from thousands of people moving in different directions with different hopes and worries. The autumn morning sun cast a golden glow over the tarmac, glinting off the gleaming fuselages of planes preparing for their journeys across the country. Among them was Skyline Airways Flight 411 bound for San Francisco, a long-haul crossing that promised both the routine and the unexpected. Caleb Harris sat quietly in the bustling departure lounge, watching the steady stream of travelers with an expression that was calm but alert. He was a man in his mid-40s, of average height, with a build that suggested strength but not arrogance. His skin bore the rich, warm hue of his African-American heritage, and his eyes, sharp and thoughtful, held a quiet intensity that came from years of experience navigating worlds both corporate and personal. Dressed simply in a dark navy sweater and well-worn jeans, Caleb was the kind of man who didn't need to shout his status. The lines on his face told stories of long days and sleepless nights, battles fought in boardrooms and silent struggles against expectations. He was the CEO of Harris Cybersecurity, a company that had quietly revolutionized digital defense, trusted by governments and Fortune 500 companies alike. But today, he was just a passenger, a man about to board a plane for a much-needed respite. As he approached the gate, Caleb's steps were measured, deliberate. He carried a small, sleek black leather briefcase, worn at the edges from travel. The airline staff greeted him politely, though their smiles seemed a little more reserved than those offered to others. He caught the subtle glances, curious, skeptical, like a ripple passing through the flow of routine. It was nothing new to him. The world had a way of making assumptions about men like him, based on appearances that rarely told the full story. He settled into seat 2A in the first-class cabin, the plush leather welcoming him after the long wait. Around him, the quiet murmur of other passengers filled the space, a chorus of soft conversations, the clinking of glasses, the rustle of newspapers and tablets. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh linen, a sterile calm that always struck Caleb as both comforting and strangely disconnected from the chaos below. He leaned back, closed his eyes briefly, and exhaled deeply. The past 72 hours had been relentless back-to-back meetings in Boston and Chicago, negotiations that could make or break the next chapter of his company's growth. He felt the weight of those hours settle into his bones. All he wanted now was to eat the meal that had been carefully prepared for his dietary needs and to rest, to escape the world for a few hours. His special meal wasn't a luxury or a preference, it was a necessity. Caleb had a severe allergy to certain allium's onions, garlic, chives, leeks. Even a trace could trigger a rapid, life-threatening reaction. His executive assistant, Lisa, had been meticulous. Every trip, every hotel, every restaurant had been thoroughly briefed. The special meal request for this flight, a simple seared salmon with steamed asparagus and quinoa, had been confirmed multiple times with Skyline Airways Special Services. The flight attendants began their pre-flight routine, weaving through the aisles with practiced grace. Caleb observed them with a quiet eye, noting their professional smiles, the efficiency with which they worked the cabin. Then she appeared Leah Morgan, a woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. She moved with an air of authority born from decades of experience, her uniform impeccably pressed, her demeanor polished but cold. Leah greeted passengers with warm, practiced pleasantries, her voice measured and professional. To the woman in 1A, she offered a bubbly welcome and champagne before takeoff. To the man in 1B, a nod and a soft, personalized greeting. But when her eyes landed on Caleb in 2A, something shifted. Her smile tightened. Her gaze flickered with a quiet suspicion. Caleb caught the subtle change but said nothing. He had long learned to read these silent signals, the unspoken assumptions that settled over him like an invisible weight. Leah's eyes scanned his simple navy sweater, his worn jeans, his modest sneakers. He didn't fit the stereotype she seemed to have in mind for first-class passengers. "Can I help you?" Leah's tone was clipped, devoid of warmth. The question was more than polite. It was loaded, as if she doubted he belonged there at all. "I'm fine, thank you," Caleb replied evenly, meeting her gaze with calm confidence. "Just looking forward to a smooth flight." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the unspoken message clear. "Are you sure you belong here?" Caleb held her gaze. His boarding pass read Seat 2A. That was enough. Leah's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned away, leaving behind a chill where her smile should have been. The plane began to taxi toward the runway, engines humming steadily, carrying the passengers toward their destinations and, unbeknownst to them, toward a test of patience, dignity, and courage. Caleb's mind wandered briefly to the meal he was supposed to receive. Not just food, but a shield against danger. The thought was sobering. In a world so interconnected and advanced, a man's life could still hang on the promise of a simple meal being honored. He pulled out his phone and reviewed the confirmation emails once more, a small anchor of certainty amid the growing unease. The flight attendants would soon take meal orders, and Caleb hoped his carefully communicated needs would be respected. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that this flight was about to become much more than just a journey from one city to another. The cabin of Skyline Airways. Flight 411 shimmered with quiet luxury. Soft lighting bathed the first-class section in a warm glow. Passengers settled into their plush leather seats, unfolding newspapers or tapping thoughtfully at tablets. The faint hum of conversation mingled with the distant roar of engines preparing for takeoff. It was a world designed for comfort, for escape, for privilege. Yet, beneath the surface, tensions swirled unseen, ready to break the calm. Leah Morgan moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency. At 50 years old, she had the demeanor of someone who had spent decades in the skies. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back into a tight, severe bun that seemed to mirror the rigidity of her expression. Her icy blue eyes scanned the rows of seats with the sharpness of a hawk, missing nothing. She greeted each passenger by name, her voice a polished blend of warmth and professionalism. To Mr. Dalton in 1A, a portly executive with a gentle smile, she offered a hearty welcome and a flute of champagne. Mrs. Whitman in 1B received a gracious nod and a comment about the crisp autumn weather in San Francisco. But when Leah's gaze reached seat 2A, it shifted. Caleb Harris sat upright, unassuming yet unyielding in his quiet confidence. His navy sweater and jeans contrasted with the tailored suits and silk scarves around him. But he carried himself with an ease that transcended fashion. Leah's eyes lingered, flickering with suspicion before she quickly masked it with a measured smile. Her smile didn't reach her eyes when she said, "Can I assist you with anything, sir?" Caleb returned her gaze steadily. "No, thank you. Just settling in." There was an almost imperceptible pause before Leah nodded curtly and moved on. Yet that pause spoke volumes, a hesitation born not of uncertainty, but of judgment. Throughout the cabin, subtle nuances shaped the invisible boundaries between people, the way Leah lingered longer with white passengers, the warmth in her tone as she spoke to them, the softness of her touch as she adjusted a blanket or offered a menu. These were small courtesies that spoke of belonging. For Caleb, these gestures were withheld. The chill in her demeanor was a quiet declaration, "You're not like the others here." Caleb felt it with an aching familiarity. He had long since learned to recognize the quiet walls people erected around him, to measure the distance they put between their comfort and his presence. This wasn't a first, it wouldn't be the last, yet he chose not to react. The weight of a lifetime of small exclusions had taught him restraint. He reminded himself that this flight was about more than social discomfort, it was about survival. As Leah continued down the aisle, Caleb's mind drifted to the hours ahead. He knew he would be confined within this metal tube for the next 8 hours, dependent on the crew to honor the medical needs that were not negotiable. His allergy was not a preference or a convenience. It was a matter of life and death. In those moments before meal service began, Caleb found himself reflecting on the countless times he had confronted similar prejudices. Boardrooms where his ideas were dismissed before being heard, clubs where his presence was tolerated but never fully welcomed, schools where his children had faced whispered doubts about their place. He asked himself quietly, almost as if hoping for an answer, why? Why, in a world that claimed progress and equality, did the old biases still linger like shadows? Why did someone like Leah carry such assumptions in her heart, despite decades of experience? His gaze shifted to the small oval window beside him. Outside, the runway stretched endlessly, a ribbon of possibility and constraint. The sun had risen fully now, spilling golden light across the clouds. Caleb allowed himself a brief moment of calm, breathing deeply as he prepared for the inevitable. Leah paused at seat 2B, where a young woman with chestnut hair smiled politely and asked for the menu. Leah responded with a warmth that seemed almost rehearsed but genuine. Caleb watched the exchange with a quiet envy. The world was easier when one fit the mold. Then Leah turned back toward him. The moment stretched like a held breath. Her lips tightened again, and she asked, "Have you pre-ordered your meal?" Caleb nodded. "Yes, multiple times. It's on the special meals list." Leah's eyes narrowed. "Let me check again." She moved to the galley, flipping through the manifest with exaggerated focus. Her expression was one of theatrical concentration as she scanned the pages. Caleb's heart rate increased, but he held steady. Minutes later, Leah returned with a dismissive air. "There's no special meal listed for your seat," she said, voice sharp. "Perhaps you should have eaten before boarding." The words struck him like cold water. Not only was his request ignored, but it was belittled. Caleb kept his voice calm but firm. "I have a severe allergy to alliums. This isn't a preference, it's a medical necessity. I cannot eat any meal prepared in a standard kitchen." Leah's smile returned this time, thin and venomous. "Many passengers request special meals last minute, hoping for better service," she said quietly. "If you were so concerned, maybe economy class would suit you better. They have simpler meal options." The insult hung heavy in the air, suffocating and deliberate. Caleb's eyes locked onto Leah's. Her words were not just a refusal of service, they were a denial of his dignity, a demand that he know his place. Around him, other passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their eyes. A few glanced sideways. Among them, a young woman in 2B Amelia Park. A tech blogger watched with a mixture of disbelief and sympathy. She bit her lip, fingers twitching over her laptop keyboard. Caleb felt the heat of anger rising, a flame that threatened to burn through his composed exterior. But he breathed deeply, steadying himself. An outburst now would play into Leah's hands. It would validate the prejudice she wielded like a weapon. Instead, he spoke quietly, with unyielding clarity. "I will not accept beef or chicken. I will have the meal I ordered. It is my right and my safety." Leah's eyes flashed triumphantly. "There is nothing for you here," she said loudly, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "The issue is closed." She turned her back, leaving Caleb to the quiet hum of the engines and the growing weight of injustice. In that moment, Caleb realized that this flight was no longer just a journey through the skies. It was a test of endurance, a confrontation with the silent forces that sought to diminish him. He was not just fighting for a meal. He was fighting for recognition, for respect, for the right to exist without judgment. The first-class cabin seemed to shrink around him. The space charged with tension as the flight attendants continued their rounds, the passengers watching, waiting. Leah's gaze lingered on Caleb one last time before she moved on, but the damage had been done. Caleb Harris settled back in his seat, eyes fixed ahead, mind racing with plans. This was only the beginning. The moment Leah Morgan returned to Caleb Harris's seat, the tension in the cabin seemed to tighten like a drawn wire ready to snap. Caleb sat upright, his posture calm but resolute. The previous exchanges had already unsettled the delicate balance of the first-class cabin, a space where luxury and exclusivity often masked the invisible lines of social division. Leah held her notepad like a shield, her fingers tapping impatiently against the leather cover. Her eyes met Caleb's, and in them was a mixture of frustration and a barely concealed contempt. "For your meal, the choices are beef fillet or pan-seared chicken," she said. Her tone clipped, her smile tight and forced. She didn't mention the pasta option. It was clear she didn't expect Caleb to want anything beyond the standard menu. Caleb's gaze did not waver. "I have a special meal pre-ordered," he replied evenly. "It's listed under my name, Caleb Harris. It's a medical dietary requirement. Severe allergy to allium's onions, garlic, chives, leeks. I cannot eat anything else." Leah's face went blank for a moment, as if caught between irritation and disbelief. Then she gave a small scoff, flipping through the manifest again as if the answer would magically appear. "No special meal is listed for Seat 2A, she said finally. "If it's not on my list, it's not on this plane. You can have the beef or the chicken." Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm, even cold. "I assure you, the meal was ordered and confirmed. I cannot risk cross-contamination. Even trace amounts could close my airway." Leah's smile returned, this time laced with venom. "Lots of passengers try to get special meals last minute. They think it gets them better service," she said in a conspiratorial whisper. "Maybe you should have eaten before boarding, or perhaps you'd be more comfortable in economy, where the meal service is simpler." The words were a dagger wrapped in silk, a deliberate insult disguised as concern. It wasn't just a refusal of service, it was a calculated humiliation. A reminder that Caleb's presence here was conditional and contested. Caleb felt a coldness creeping into his bones, a familiar but unwelcome sensation. He had encountered this before: the quiet, dismissive racism that assumed he was lying, exaggerating, or simply incompetent. It was a low expectation that cut deeper than any shouted insult. The young woman in 2B, Amelia Park, shifted uncomfortably. She glanced sideways at Caleb, eyes wide with sympathetic disbelief. Amelia had been watching the exchange closely, her fingers hovering over her laptop keyboard as if ready to document every detail. She knew this was more than just a disagreement about food. It was a moment of reckoning. Caleb took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying himself. Anger rose like a tide within him, hot and dangerous, but he refused to let it show. An outburst would only validate Leah's narrative. She wanted to paint him as difficult, disruptive, unreasonable. He would not give her that satisfaction. "I will not be having the beef or the chicken," Caleb said quietly, his voice now devoid of warmth. "I will be having my pre-ordered meal. I suggest you find it." Leah's eyes flashed with triumph. "There's nothing to find," she said loudly, making sure others could hear. "The issue is closed." Then, without another word, she turned her back and moved down the aisle. The word disruptive hung in the air like a threat, heavy and suffocating. It was a weapon in Leah's arsenal, a label that could lead to consequences far worse than mere inconvenience. Caleb understood all too well that this word was the beginning of a very dangerous game. He leaned back, his head resting against the plush leather of his seat. The hum of the engines was a low growl in his ears, a steady reminder that they were thousands of feet in the air, trapped in this metal tube with people who had decided his life was worth less than their convenience. For a few minutes, Caleb remained still, a statue of forced composure. He replayed Leah's words in his mind, the way she suggested he belonged in economy. It was a classic gatekeeping tactic designed to make him feel small, to make him question his own right to be here. He had spent a lifetime rising above these moments with silent dignity. But this was different. This was not about pride or status. This was about his very survival. The call button blinked quietly on his armrest. Caleb pressed it. A young flight attendant appeared almost immediately. His eyes darted nervously, betraying an unspoken awareness of the situation. "I'd like to speak with the purser." "Please?" Caleb said quietly. The young man hesitated before nodding and disappearing toward the galley. Moments later, Mark Lewis entered the cabin. He was in his late 40s, with thinning hair and a weary expression that suggested long hours and heavier burdens. His uniform was impeccable, but his posture lacked conviction. "Is there a problem?" Sir Mark asked, his voice polite but guarded. Caleb explained the situation calmly, detailing the allergy, the confirmed special meal, and Leah's refusal to honor it. He spoke carefully, avoiding accusations, but making it clear that this was a serious safety issue. Mark listened, his face growing more troubled with each word. He was trained to handle emergencies, but this was something different. This was a battle between individual rights and institutional inertia, between medical necessity and ingrained prejudice. "I will check the manifest personally," Mark promised, his voice carrying a note of concern. He disappeared into the galley, leaving Caleb to watch the cabin, to feel the growing tension among the passengers. Leah stood nearby, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of defiance and triumph. She had been flying this route for over 15 years, long enough to feel untouchable. Her eyes flicked toward Mark as if daring him to contradict her. Mark returned after a tense few minutes. "I have checked," he said, avoiding Caleb's gaze. "There is no special meal listed for your seat. I am sorry, but that's the reality." Caleb's heart sank. "That is impossible," he said flatly. "I have confirmation emails on my phone. This is a clear failure on your part." Mark sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Regardless, the meal is not physically on board. There's nothing more I can do." The weight of those words settled over Caleb like a stone. He was trapped on a 9-hour flight with no safe food, surrounded by people who refused to acknowledge the seriousness of his condition. He looked back toward Leah, who wore a smug smile as if the conflict was already won. Caleb's mind raced. He knew what must come next. He couldn't remain silent. His life depended on it. He pressed the call button again. When the young attendant returned, Caleb asked to speak with the captain. The flight was far from over, and the fight for dignity and safety was just beginning. Caleb Harris sat back in his seat, his eyes fixed on the small oval window beside him. Outside, the world was a blur of clouds and sky, vast and indifferent. Inside the cabin, the soft murmur of passengers and the quiet clatter of flight attendants filled the air. Yet, beneath this surface, Caleb felt a storm raging, one far more complex and exhausting than the physical confines of the airplane. The refusal to honor his special meal request was more than an inconvenience. It was a stark reminder of the invisible walls he had been fighting all his life. The subtle judgments, the assumptions based on skin color or background, the quiet exclusion that spoke louder than any shouted insult. Caleb's mind drifted back through the years, tracing the long arc of his journey. He remembered his first board meeting as a young executive, the way some faces had tightened when he entered the room, the barely concealed doubts about his competence. How many times had he had to prove himself? Not just once, but over and over again. He recalled nights when he lay awake, wondering if his children would face the same barriers, the same quiet dismissals, the exhaustion of carrying not just his own ambitions, but the weight of generations before him who had been told they did not belong. Yet through it all, Caleb had learned to be still, to hold his anger close, to channel it into determination. He had become a man of quiet strength, understanding that power was not always loud or visible, Sometimes it was the resilience to endure, to navigate the currents beneath the surface. He thought of the flight attendant, Leah Morgan. What had led her to this moment? Was it fear, habit, ignorance? The years spent in a system that rewarded conformity and punished challenge, Caleb did not know, but he understood the complexity. People were shaped by their experiences, their fears, and the world they had inherited. But understanding did not mean acceptance. Caleb's heart ached with a mixture of frustration and sadness. This was not just about a meal on a plane. It was about the persistent failures of a society that claimed progress but still allowed prejudice to thrive in subtle, insidious ways. He looked around the cabin. Some passengers were engrossed in their devices, oblivious to the tension. Others exchanged glances, whispers passing like a current. Amelia Park, the young tech blogger, was still watching, her fingers poised over her keyboard. Caleb appreciated her presence, a silent ally in a difficult moment. As the flight attendants moved down the aisle, Caleb felt the familiar stirrings of doubt. Should he push harder? Raise his voice? Make a scene? He knew Leah wanted that a reason to paint him as difficult, to justify her dismissal. But he also knew that losing his composure could undermine everything. His mind raced through options. He thought of his assistant, Lisa, who had painstakingly coordinated every detail of this trip. She had triple-checked with Skyline Airways, confirming his meal orders multiple times. How had it all fallen apart? Caleb's thoughts wandered to the broader implications. What did this say about a system that failed to protect the vulnerable A company that allowed prejudice to influence service, the liability, the risk, the human cost? Despite the turmoil inside, Caleb's exterior remained composed, his breathing slow, measured. He understood that power was not in confrontation alone, but in control, the ability to shape a response that demanded change without surrendering dignity. He reached for his phone, scrolling through the confirmation emails once again. Each message was a lifeline, proof of a promise broken. He composed himself and pressed the call button discreetly. Moments later, a younger flight attendant appeared. His expression was nervous, tentative. Yes. Sir, how can I help? Caleb spoke quietly but firmly. I need to speak with the purser. This is a medical emergency. The attendant nodded and disappeared toward the galley. Caleb leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. He knew the next few minutes could define the rest of the flight. Mark Lewis, the purser, soon appeared. His face was a mask of professionalism, but Caleb detected the flicker of uncertainty beneath. Mark was a man caught between duty and fear, a product of a system that valued harmony over justice. Caleb explained the situation again, emphasizing the severity of his allergy and the confirmed meal order. He spoke calmly, but each word carried the weight of years of fighting for recognition. Mark listened, occasionally nodding, but his body language betrayed hesitation. He glanced toward Leah, who stood nearby, arms crossed and radiating confidence. The tension between the two crew members was palpable, a silent battle of wills unfolding just out of sight. Mark excused himself to check the manifest, promising Caleb he would do what he could. Caleb's heart sank as he watched him retreat, knowing the real battle was not just with paperwork but with prejudice. Time seemed to stretch. Caleb's thoughts grew darker. What if this was another dead end? Another instance where protocol was less important than bias? He felt the weight of isolation, surrounded by people yet profoundly alone in this struggle. The hum of the engines was a distant roar, drowned out by the quiet storm within. As minutes passed, Caleb found himself wrestling with a deeper question. How many others suffered in silence, denied basic rights and respect? How often did people like Leah wield their power carelessly, unaware or uncaring of the lives they affected? Despite the growing frustration, Caleb's resolve hardened. This was not just about him anymore. It was about standing for everyone who had been silenced, overlooked, or diminished. When Mark returned, his expression was less certain. He told Caleb the manifest showed no special meal for seat 2A. Caleb's confirmation emails told a different story. Mark's voice faltered as he said, "There's nothing I can do. The meal is not on board." Caleb felt the familiar sting of helplessness but refused to give in. "This is a failure of your system," he said quietly. "I need to escalate this." Mark hesitated, but Caleb's quiet strength left no room for argument. Caleb pressed the call button again, summoning a flight attendant and requesting to speak with the captain. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. He was trapped in a narrow metal tube miles above the earth, facing not only the limits of technology and logistics but the deeper barriers of prejudice and indifference. And yet, in this moment of quiet battle, Caleb found clarity. He was not just fighting for a meal. He was fighting for respect. He was fighting for life. He was fighting for change. Mark Lewis stood near the galley door, the manifest clutched in his hands like a fragile shield. His eyes flicked over the printed list once more, as if willing the special meal to appear next to seat 2A. But the name wasn't there. The absence was more than an oversight. It was a problem that carried weight far beyond a simple catering error. Mark was a man caught between worlds. With thinning hair and a face etched by years of long-haul flights, he had the tired, worn look of someone who had spent too many hours trying to keep peace in a confined, airborne world. As purser, he was the highest-ranking cabin crew member on this flight, the person responsible for the safety and comfort of every passenger. Yet now, standing face-to-face with Caleb Harris's unwavering resolve, he felt powerless. Leah Morgan's words echoed in his mind. She had been flying this route for 15 years, a senior figure within the crew. Her authority was informal but absolute. Mark knew that challenging her was risky. She had the experience, the confidence, and the support of many colleagues who respected her, even if they didn't always agree with her methods. Mark sighed heavily and pushed the manifest back into his pocket. He glanced toward the first-class cabin. Caleb sat quietly, his expression unreadable but firm. Mark felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. On one hand, there was the duty to protect Caleb's life. On the other, there was the need to maintain order in the cabin and keep the flight on schedule. He reminded himself of the countless briefings and protocols he had attended. Safety always came first, they said. Every crew member was trained to recognize and respond to medical emergencies, to never dismiss a passenger's concern. Yet here he was, hesitating. Mark knew that a medical allergy was not a trivial matter. Anaphylaxis could strike in minutes and was potentially fatal. But the evidence before him was contradictory. The manifest did not list Caleb's meal. Leah insisted the meal was not on board. The special services team at the airline seemed to have failed somewhere. And now, Mark had to choose between confrontation and compliance. He chose compliance. Returning to Caleb, Mark forced a polite but firm tone. "Sir, I have checked the manifest myself. The meal is not listed, and it's not on this aircraft. I'm sorry, there's nothing more I can do." Caleb's jaw clenched, but his voice remained calm. "This is a serious failure of your system. I have the confirmation emails here." He tapped his phone, ready to show the evidence. Mark looked away. He was caught in a web of fear and indecision. To openly challenge Leah could mean fracturing the crew's cohesion mid-flight, a situation no manager wanted. But to deny a passenger's medical need was a breach of duty, a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. Leah, standing a few feet away, watched with a satisfied smile. She had made her point. The man in 2A was being put in his place. The rest of the first-class cabin remained silent but attentive. Some passengers exchanged worried glances. Amelia Park's fingers were poised to capture every moment. Knowing that this was no ordinary conflict, Mark's mind raced as he tried to navigate the impossible. The captain had not yet been informed. The flight was scheduled to cross the Atlantic in a matter of hours. There was no room for delay, no space for drama. He wished for a simple solution, for Leah to relent and order the special meal from the galley. But he knew the truth. The meal simply wasn't there. The tension was palpable. Caleb's breathing was steady, but inside, the pressure built. He had endured enough silence and dismissal for one day. "I will not accept the beef or chicken," Caleb said quietly but firmly. "I will have the meal I ordered. It is not negotiable." Mark swallowed hard. He was caught in a corner, forced to choose between protocol and people. The flight could not afford a disruption. Yet, ignoring Caleb's plea could risk a medical emergency miles above the ocean. His eyes flicked to Leah again. She was the senior crew member and, in many ways, the real power in this cabin. Mark stepped back toward the galley, his steps heavy. He had to make a decision. He could call the captain and escalate the issue, or he could try to calm the situation and hope it resolved itself. In the galley, Leah was already preparing for the meal service, her face a mask of quiet triumph. Mark took a deep breath and dialed the captain's intercom. "Captain Reynolds, this is Purser Lewis," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We have a situation with a passenger in first class. There's a medical meal issue. The passenger has a severe allergy, but the meal isn't on board, and he's refusing the standard options." There was a pause on the other end. "Understood. Lewis, keep me updated. Safety is paramount," came the captain's calm reply. Mark felt the weight of responsibility shift again. He was now the messenger of a problem that could disrupt the entire flight. Returning to Caleb, Mark spoke with a hint of apology. "Sir, I will inform the captain and see what we can do." Caleb nodded, grateful for the small concession but knowing it was far from enough. The hours ahead promised to test every limit of patience, of professionalism, of humanity. Meanwhile, Leah prepared the service cart with the standard meals, her eyes occasionally flicking toward Caleb with a mixture of disdain and satisfaction. She believed she was doing her job, maintaining order and control. To her, Caleb was a difficult passenger whose demands threatened the smooth operation of the flight. But Leah did not understand the full weight of her actions. She did not see the courage it took for Caleb to remain composed, to fight quietly for his right to live without compromise. She did not realize that in dismissing him, She had ignited a fire that could not be easily extinguished. The first-class cabin remained suspended in this fragile balance between power and resistance, between silence and action. Caleb sat back, readying himself for the next step. His fight was far from over. The cabin of Skyline Airways Flight 411 had become a stage for a drama that no one had anticipated. The quiet hum of the engine seemed to pulse with tension as the hours stretched forward. Passengers who had settled into their journeys now sat on edge, their eyes flicking toward the first-class section where the conflict was quietly unfolding. Leah Morgan returned from the galley with her usual measured pace, but her expression had changed. There was a sharpness to her eyes, a renewed determination. She approached Caleb Harris's seat once again, this time carrying an air of authority that brooked no challenge. "You are becoming disruptive, Mr. Harris," Leah said, her voice low but firm, projecting just enough to ensure nearby passengers could hear. "We cannot allow this to continue." The word disruptive was a hammer strike. It carried weight beyond the cabin wall's threats of restraint, legal action, possible removal upon landing. In the world of commercial aviation, it was the ultimate weapon in the flight attendant's arsenal, a label that could upend a passenger's life. Caleb met Leah's gaze steadily, his expression calm but resolute. He knew what she was implying. He was aware that by insisting on his rights, he was stepping into dangerous territory, but he also knew that backing down was not an option. "This is not disruption," Caleb replied evenly. "It is a medical necessity. I am simply requesting what I was promised." Leah's lips curled into a tight smile. "Your behavior is causing distress to other passengers. We have a responsibility to maintain order and safety." Around them, the cabin stirred. A few passengers glanced nervously, some whispering among themselves. Amelia Park's fingers moved rapidly across her keyboard, capturing every word, every tone. Caleb's mind raced. He was trapped in a narrow metal tube miles above the ocean, facing not only a life-threatening allergy but also the threat of being labeled a troublemaker for insisting on his right to live. He fought the urge to raise his voice, to make a scene that would force the crew's hand, but he knew Leah wanted exactly that. She wanted justification to remove him, to paint him as difficult and unreasonable. Instead, Caleb chose another path. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so that only Leah and the nearest passengers could hear. "I am not here to cause trouble. I am here to stay alive." Leah's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Mark Lewis stepped forward. His face was pale, sweat glistening at his temples. The weight of the situation was pressing down on him, and it showed. "Sir," Mark began hesitantly, "I understand your concerns, but we must also consider the comfort of the other passengers." Caleb looked at Mark, surprised by the purser's siding with Leah. He had hoped for an ally, someone who would recognize the severity of his situation and support him. Instead, Mark's words felt like a betrayal. "Comfort is important," Caleb said quietly, "but not at the cost of safety. I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for survival." Mark's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. Leah's smile grew colder, sensing victory. At that moment, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are aware of a situation in first class involving a passenger's meal request. We are working to resolve it as quickly as possible. Thank you for your patience." The announcement did little to calm the atmosphere. Passengers whispered, speculated, Some exchanged looks of sympathy toward Caleb. Others rolled their eyes. Caleb's gaze swept the cabin. He saw a spectrum of reactions: curiosity, frustration, empathy, impatience. It was a microcosm of society itself. Amelia leaned over and whispered, "I'm posting this live. People need to see what's happening." Caleb nodded subtly, appreciating the gesture. In this digital age, the truth could no longer be confined to the cabin. Leah returned to her post, but her presence loomed over Caleb like a shadow. The label disruptive had been cast, and the consequences could be severe. Caleb's thoughts turned inward. He wrestled with the reality of being perceived as a problem simply for asserting a basic right. He recalled the countless times society had tried to silence him, to reduce him to a stereotype. His heart ached with the weight of those memories, but his spirit remained unbroken. He knew the path ahead was fraught with challenges, but he was determined to see it through. As the flight continued its ascent into the sky, Caleb prepared for the next steps in a battle that had become far greater than a meal. Caleb Harris sat quietly in his seat, the words "disruptive passenger" echoing faintly in his mind. That label wasn't just a description. It was a threat, a warning that his insistence on safety and dignity could have severe consequences. But Caleb was no stranger to such battles. He had spent his life navigating worlds where respect had to be earned, often clawed for in silence. The aircraft hummed steadily, the steady drone of the engines a constant reminder of how far from the ground he was. Yet, despite the physical distance, Caleb felt more isolated than ever. His fingers hovered over his phone. This was no longer a private struggle. It was a fight that needed the weight of influence and power behind it. He had one ally who could tip the scales: Marcus Allen, CEO of Horizon Group, the parent company of Skyline Airways, and a longtime friend. Caleb pulled out his sleek black satellite phone. Though officially banned by airline policy, it was his lifeline during emergencies. His thumb hovered over Marcus's contact name. He hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of what this call could mean not just for him, but for everyone on board. Then he pressed the call button. The line connected almost instantly. "Caleb, you're in the air." Marcus's voice was sharp and alert, tinged with surprise. "Yes." "And that's the problem," Caleb replied evenly, his voice calm but carrying an edge of urgency. Marcus sat up straighter in his leather office chair, instantly focused. He knew Caleb well enough to recognize when things were serious. "Talk to me," he said. Caleb began recounting the events with precision: the suspicious glare from Leah Morgan, the refusal to serve his medically necessary meal, the condescending suggestion that he should eat before boarding or move to economy class, and the purser's refusal to help. "It's not just poor service, Marcus," Caleb said quietly. "It's a blatant disregard for safety and dignity. I've been labeled disruptive for insisting on my right to live." Marcus's jaw tightened. "This is unacceptable." Caleb's voice lowered. "I have confirmation emails from the airline's special services team. The meal was ordered and confirmed multiple times. Yet here I am, 8,000 feet in the air, with no safe food." There was a long pause. Marcus finally spoke. "I'm pulling up the flight details now. Where exactly are you over the northeast corridor, heading toward the Atlantic?" Caleb answered. Marcus's fingers flew over his keyboard, bringing up the flight tracker on a Bloomberg terminal. The tiny icon hovered over the clouds between New Haven and Boston. "This flight's already close to its point of no return," Marcus said. his voice tight. Caleb nodded silently, the weight of their situation settling between them. "This is serious. Caleb, I'm going to make some calls. You stay calm. I've got your back." Caleb felt a flicker of relief. Marcus was not just a powerful CEO, he was a man who understood the stakes. "Thank you," Caleb said softly, "but this isn't just about me. It's about what this means for everyone who faces this kind of treatment. We need systemic change." Marcus's voice held conviction. "I agree. I'm on it." Within minutes, Marcus was on the line with David Chen, Vice President of Operations for Skyline Airways. David was the nerve center of the airline's global flight operations, the man responsible for coordinating every move in the sky and on the ground. "David, it's Marcus Allen. I'm on the phone with Caleb Harris on Flight 411. He has a severe allergy and was denied his medically necessary meal. The crew labeled him disruptive when he insisted." David's voice was grim. "This is serious. Marcus, I'll contact the captain immediately." "Good. This flight is approaching the point of no return. I want it turned around and returned to New Haven. No discussion. Safety and dignity come first." David hesitated, the implications obvious. Turning a transcontinental flight back would cost millions in fuel, landing fees, disrupted schedules, and disgruntled passengers. Marcus's voice hardened. "I don't care about the cost. If this story hits the press, the damage will be immeasurable. You're authorized to take whatever action is necessary. Return that plane now." David swallowed hard, then replied, "Understood," back on the plane. Caleb remained seated, phone pressed to his ear as he listened to the unfolding decisions below. Minutes later, a different flight attendant approached him with a polite but urgent message. "Mr. Harris, the captain will be speaking with you shortly." Caleb nodded and settled back, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. The captain's voice came over the intercom moments later. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are dealing with an unexpected situation involving a passenger's medical needs. We have been instructed to return to New Haven to ensure all safety measures are met. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your understanding." The cabin erupted in whispers and surprise. Passengers exchanged stunned looks, some frustrated, others curious. Caleb felt a quiet satisfaction. The flight was turning not because of mechanical failure, but because of courage and truth. Amelia Park, seated nearby, was already composing her next post. The digital world was watching now. Leah Morgan's smile had vanished. She stood stiffly, her eyes darting toward Mark Lewis, who looked pale and defeated. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself a moment of calm. He hadn't wanted this fight. He hadn't wanted to disrupt hundreds of lives. All he had wanted was a meal to keep him alive. And yet, in standing his ground, he had set in motion a reckoning that would reach far beyond the confines of this airplane. The announcement from the captain rippled through the cabin like an unexpected storm. Passengers, caught between disbelief and frustration, exchanged anxious glances as the news sank in. Skyline Airways Flight 411 was turning back to New Haven. An entire transcontinental flight, reversing course midair, not for a mechanical failure or security threat, but because of a medical meal dispute. The decision was unprecedented, the implications enormous. For many, the inconvenience was a source of irritation. Business travelers fumed silently over missed meetings. Families worried about connections, and holidaymakers fretted over lost time, Yet beneath the surface, a story was unfolding, one that was about much more than delays or schedules. Caleb Harris sat quietly in his seat, the familiar hum of the engines now tinged with tension. The weight of the moment settled over him, heavier than the altitude itself. He had not sought this disruption. All he had wanted was to be safe. Leah Morgan, the flight attendant whose refusal had sparked the crisis, stood near the galley, her posture stiff and expression unreadable. The certainty she had carried earlier had faded into a brittle mask of control. Mark Lewis, the purser, looked pale and tense, acutely aware that the situation was spiraling beyond his influence. Passengers in first class whispered among themselves. Some expressed sympathy for Caleb, recognizing the injustice. Others shook their heads, frustrated by the delay. Amelia Park continued typing furiously on her laptop, capturing every detail, every nuance for the digital world to see. The physical act of turning the plane was a slow, deliberate ballet. The captain skillfully banked the Airbus A350, its massive wings slicing through the clouds as it shifted direction. Passengers pressed their faces to windows, watching as the familiar coastline of New England reappeared beneath them. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, calm but resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing on a remote stand upon return to New Haven. We ask that you remain in your seats after landing until further instructions are given. Thank you for your understanding." The directive added an undercurrent of unease. This was not the usual arrival routine. The remote stand was a clear signal that the airline intended to handle the situation with discretion and control. But, to the passengers, it only deepened the mystery. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, drawing a deep breath. Despite the exhaustion and frustration, a sense of quiet victory stirred within him. This moment was more than personal. It was a turning point. He thought of the thousands of people with life-threatening allergies, the countless others who had been ignored or dismissed. This flight was a microcosm of a larger fight, one for recognition, respect, and safety. As the plane descended, the cabin crew moved through the aisles, offering water and apologies, their smiles forced but professional. Leah passed by Caleb, her eyes briefly meeting his. There was no acknowledgement, no regret, only a cold calculation that would haunt her in the hours to come. Mark Lewis avoided Caleb's gaze altogether, retreating to the galley with a heavy heart. The weight of the decision was his to bear, but the consequences would ripple far beyond this flight. Outside, ground crews prepared for the unexpected arrival. Security personnel and airline representatives stood ready, their presence a visible reminder that this incident was no ordinary matter. As the plane touched down smoothly on the tarmac, a hush fell over the cabin. Passengers waited in uneasy silence, aware that the hours ahead would test patience, diplomacy, and integrity. Caleb remained seated, his thoughts racing. The fight was far from over. There would be apologies, investigations, and perhaps even repercussions for those responsible. But, for now, the immediate priority was clear ensure his safety and demand accountability. Amelia leaned toward Caleb, her eyes bright with determination. "This is going viral," she whispered. "People need to see the truth." Caleb nodded. The power of exposure was undeniable in a world ruled by social media. As the aircraft taxied to the remote stand, a small team of airline executives and legal advisors boarded, their expressions grave. Among them was Richard Davies, head of European operations, a man known for his no-nonsense approach and swift decision-making. Richard moved directly to Caleb's seat, offering a formal but sincere apology. "Mr. Harris, on behalf of Skyline Airways and Horizon Group, I deeply regret what you have endured. We are committed to making this right." Caleb acknowledged the apology with a nod, but remained guarded. Words were easy. Change was harder. Passengers around them listened intently. Some recorded the exchange, others whispered support. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of relief and unresolved tension. As ground crews prepared to disembark passengers, Leah and Mark were summoned to the rear of the aircraft. Their faces were pale, their fates uncertain. The stark reality was beginning to settle in. This was not merely a disagreement, it was a reckoning. Outside, the sky over New Haven was clear and bright, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Caleb stared out the window, the horizon stretching endlessly before him. The victory felt bittersweet. He had won the immediate battle, but the war for dignity and justice was just beginning. The plane's wheels ground to a stop, engines powering down. The door would open soon, revealing a world eager to witness what justice looked like at 30,000 feet. The Airbus A350 came to a slow halt on the remote stand. Far from the familiar bustle of the main terminal gates, outside, the gray tarmac stretched out like an endless canvas, marked only by the scurrying figures of ground crew and security personnel. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty and tension. Passengers remained in their seats, as instructed. Whispers filled the cabin, conversations muted but urgent. The usual post-landing relief was replaced by frustration, curiosity, and a lingering sense of disbelief. What had begun as a simple cross-country flight had spiraled into an incident that no one on board would soon forget. Caleb Harris sat quietly in his seat, his calm demeanor masking the storm of thoughts swirling inside him. He had endured countless battles in boardrooms and negotiations, but this fight felt different. It was raw and personal, waged in a confined space high above the earth. His mind replayed the sequence of events, the dismissive glare from Leah Morgan, the purser Mark Lewis's hesitant complicity, the repeated refusals to acknowledge the medical necessity of his special meal. The label disruptive passenger still echoed like a bitter refrain. Around him, the cabin was a microcosm of the world outside. Some passengers expressed sympathy, quietly voicing support for Caleb's right to safety and dignity. Others were visibly annoyed, their plans disrupted and their patience worn thin. The man in 1A, an older executive named Robert Stanton, shook his head in frustration. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to the woman beside him, "all for a meal. This flight's going to cost us all." A mother tried to soothe her crying toddler, whispering reassurances that their vacation would still happen. The tension was palpable, the ripple effects of the incident extending beyond the immediate conflict. Amelia Park, seated nearby, had become the unofficial chronicler of the event. Her laptop screen glowed as she typed rapidly, uploading videos, transcribing conversations, and framing the story for her growing online audience. Her presence brought a sense of validation to Caleb, a reminder that the truth could no longer be silenced or ignored. The digital world was watching, and with it, the power to hold institutions accountable. Leah Morgan sat silently near the galley, her expression unreadable but clearly shaken. The confident authority she had wielded earlier had been replaced by a brittle veneer of control. Her eyes avoided Caleb's gaze, and she spoke little, retreating into herself as the weight of the situation pressed down. Mark Lewis looked equally distraught. The purser had always been a man who sought harmony and avoided confrontation. But now he faced the harsh consequences of his inaction. His hands trembled slightly as he moved about the cabin, performing duties with mechanical precision. The arrival of airline executives and legal advisors on board only heightened the tension. Richard Davies, the head of European operations, moved through the cabin with a purposeful stride. His reputation for swift decision-making preceded him, and passengers instinctively understood that his presence signaled serious repercussions. Richard approached Caleb's seat, his voice calm but authoritative. "Mr. Harris, on behalf of Skyline Airways and Horizon Group, I want to sincerely apologize for the ordeal you've experienced. We are committed to addressing this incident with the utmost seriousness." Caleb nodded, accepting the apology but remaining guarded. Words were easy. Actions were what mattered. Nearby, passengers recorded the exchange on their phones, broadcasting the moment live. The scene quickly spread across social media platforms, igniting conversations and debates far beyond the confines of the aircraft. Back in the galley, Leah received a formal notification from Richard. The decision was immediate and unequivocal. She and Mark Lewis were suspended pending a full investigation. The gravity of the moment was clear. Their careers, reputations, and futures hung in the balance. Leah's face paled. For years, she had been a fixture of Skyline Airways' senior cabin crew, her identity tied to the job. Now, she was confronted with the harsh reality of accountability. Her mind raced through justifications and defenses. But deep down, she knew the writing was on the wall. The public fallout was swift and severe. News outlets picked up the story within hours. Hashtags like Flight 411 and Skyline Airways trended globally. Journalists dissected every detail, and legal experts debated the implications for passenger rights and airline responsibilities. Caleb's story became a symbol, a powerful narrative about prejudice, corporate accountability, and the fight for dignity in unexpected places. Within the airline, an internal reckoning began. Executives scrambled to contain the damage, issuing statements that promised swift reforms and enhanced sensitivity training. But the underlying issues, the culture of complacency and prejudice, were harder to fix. For Caleb, the victory was bittersweet. The fight had exposed painful truths, but it had also taken a toll. He thought of the countless others who might still face similar battles without the resources or connections to fight back. As the plane emptied onto buses that would ferry passengers to the terminal, Caleb felt a mixture of relief and resolve. The journey was far from over. The aftermath of Skyline Airways Flight 411's dramatic return to New Haven was a storm that swept through the airline, the passengers, and most deeply, through the lives of those involved. The plane was emptied swiftly. Passengers shuttled by buses to the terminal, but the ripple effects of what had happened high above the clouds would echo long after the jet engines cooled. Caleb Harris stood apart from the crowd, his tall frame calm but vigilant. He had expected an apology, a simple acknowledgement of the failure that had put his life at risk. What he had not anticipated was the scale of the reckoning that would follow. In the days that came, Leah Morgan and Mark Lewis were formally suspended. The airline's investigation was thorough and uncompromising. The recordings Amelia Park had captured the tone of Leah's dismissive remarks. The purser's hesitant complicity were irrefutable evidence. The public exposure left no room for denial or deflection. Leah's world began to unravel rapidly. The proud, seasoned flight attendant who had spent nearly 3 decades soaring through the skies was suddenly grounded in a way she never imagined. Her colleagues distanced themselves. The social media storm branded her with a harsh spotlight. The phrase, "flight attendant refuses medical meal," trended with her name attached, painting her as the face of prejudice and neglect. Her family and friends faced the backlash, too. She received hostile messages, her address was leaked online, and reporters camped outside her home. The isolation was suffocating. The weight of the public shaman was more than professional. It was deeply personal. Leah had never seen herself as racist or cruel. In her mind, she was a dedicated worker enforcing rules, a guardian of order. But reality was unforgiving. A phone call from her younger sister shattered the fragile defenses Leah had built. Emily's voice was raw with emotion. "I saw the video. Leah, the way you talk to that man, it's the same ignorance that terrifies me for my son's life. You don't realize how dangerous that kind of dismissal can be." Leah tried to explain, to defend herself, but the connection ended abruptly. The rejection cut deeper than any legal threat. Mark Lewis's experience was different, but no less painful. He had been the man caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to a colleague and duty to a passenger. His indecision had cost him dearly. The scrutiny was relentless. His social media accounts were flooded with anger and disappointment. He retreated into solitude, overwhelmed by guilt and shame. Meanwhile, Caleb's position remained firm but weary. The victory he had won was significant, but came at a cost. The disruption of Flight 411 had angered many passengers, some of whom publicly expressed frustration at the inconvenience. Caleb understood their pain, but knew that justice required sacrifice. In the corporate world, the fallout was seismic. Skyline Airways' stock price took a sharp dive. Investors and analysts questioned the airline's culture, leadership, and commitment to passenger safety. The story dominated headlines, framing the airline not just as a failed service provider, but as an institution grappling with systemic prejudice. Marcus Allen, CEO of Horizon Group, took decisive action. He publicly acknowledged the airline's failures and pledged sweeping reforms. His statements were direct and unapologetic. The behavior of our employees was unacceptable. We will not tolerate discrimination or negligence. This incident is a catalyst for change. To reinforce this commitment, Marcus announced the creation of the Harris-Allen Accord, a multi-million-dollar fund dedicated to passenger dignity and allergy awareness. The Accord would finance comprehensive training programs for all airline staff and provide grants to families struggling with the costs of managing severe allergies. The fund was named in honor of Caleb and Marcus, symbolizing their joint dedication to turning a painful incident into a force for good. Caleb viewed the Accord with mixed emotions. It was a step forward, a tangible legacy emerging from adversity. Yet the road to real change was long and uncertain. He thought of families like Leah's sister, whose children lived in daily fear of allergic reactions. The lawsuit filed by Leah against Skyline Airways for wrongful termination only intensified the drama. Leah's legal team painted her as a scapegoat, a loyal employee punished for following protocol. But the overwhelming evidence and the airline's robust counterclaim seeking to recover the costs of the flight diversion made her case tenuous. public opinion sided overwhelmingly against Leah. Her attempt to recast herself as a victim of corporate overreach failed to gain traction. The media portrayed her as resistant to accountability, a symbol of the stubborn prejudices that continued to plague industries worldwide. As the legal battle unfolded, Leah found herself increasingly isolated. Job opportunities evaporated, her professional reputation irreparably damaged. The woman who had once commanded respect in the skies now found herself struggling for basic employment on the ground. In quiet moments, Leah reflected on the choices she had made. The arrogance, the dismissiveness, the failure to see the humanity in Caleb Harris all had led to this reckoning. Her prejudice, once small and insidious, had exploded into a career-ending event. Caleb, meanwhile, continued his work with renewed purpose. He traveled the country, speaking about allergy awareness, inclusion, and the importance of dignity in all interactions. His story became a beacon for others facing discrimination, a testament to the power of quiet strength. The passengers of Flight 411, though inconvenienced, became advocates too. Many shared their experiences, calling for airlines to improve training and policies. The incident sparked broader discussions in corporate boardrooms, government hearings, and social media platforms. The immediate drama of Flight 411 faded over time, but its impact endured. It was a stark reminder that progress required vigilance, courage, and sometimes the willingness to disrupt the status quo. Caleb Harris's fight was not just for a meal on a plane. It was for recognition, respect, and the fundamental right to be treated with humanity. In the end, the true consequence was transformation personal, institutional, and societal. And for Leah Morgan, the bitter taste of karma was a harsh lesson she could never forget. The story of Skyline Airways Flight 411 did not end when the passengers disembarked that day. Instead, it sparked a wave of change that stretched far beyond the tarmac at New Haven. Caleb Harris's quiet but firm stand against discrimination and negligence had ignited conversations, policies, and awareness that transformed the airline industry and beyond. In the weeks following the incident, Caleb was invited to speak at conferences and corporate events. His narrative was one of resilience, dignity, and the quiet power of persistence. He spoke not only about the ordeal he faced, but about the broader implications for society. The fight for respect is ongoing, Caleb told a packed auditorium at a major tech conference. It's about more than just individual incidents. It's about systemic change. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone, regardless of background or circumstance. Caleb's message resonated widely. From airline executives to advocacy groups, his story became a catalyst for dialogue and reform. Many companies began to review their policies on disability accommodations, sensitivity training, and customer service standards. Amelia Park's coverage of the Flight 411 incident had gone viral, drawing millions of views and sparking fierce debates on social media platforms. Her detailed posts and live streams gave voice to the unseen and often unheard struggles of passengers with severe allergies and other disabilities. Public pressure mounted on Skyline Airways to not only address the immediate fallout, but to commit to lasting reforms. Marcus Allen, CEO of Horizon Group, doubled down on his pledge. Under his direction, the airline launched the Harris-Allen Accord in full force, providing extensive training modules developed with leading civil rights organizations and medical experts. The Accord's initiatives included workshops on unconscious bias, the importance of medical accommodations, and the human impact of prejudice. The airline also partnered with advocacy groups to offer grants and resources to families managing severe allergies. Inside Skyline Airways, the corporate culture began to shift, though not without resistance. Some employees welcomed the changes, recognizing the need for growth. Others, like Leah Morgan, had already been sidelined, their attitudes revealed and challenged by the public reckoning. Leah's lawsuit against the airline dragged on, but her influence waned. The overwhelming evidence against her, combined with the legal team's vigorous counterclaims, painted a bleak picture for her case. More importantly, the personal cost was profound. Her estrangement from family and community deepened. The isolation was as much a punishment as any legal judgment. Mark Lewis, quietly remorseful, sought redemption through volunteering with airline advocacy programs and supporting training initiatives. Though his career in commercial aviation was effectively over, he dedicated himself to fostering awareness and empathy among future generations of flight attendants. Meanwhile, Caleb found a renewed sense of purpose. The ordeal had tested him in unexpected ways, but it also reinforced his commitment to justice and inclusion. He and Marcus worked together closely to ensure that the accord was not just a symbolic gesture, but a force for real change. Their collaboration extended beyond aviation, inspiring similar programs in other industries. Caleb's personal life reflected the growth and challenges of the public battle. His family supported him fiercely, but he also grappled with the emotional toll of reliving painful moments in the spotlight. The burden of representing so many weighed heavily. Yet, amid the strain, Caleb found moments of hope. He received letters and messages from people whose lives had been touched by his story. Parents relieved to find resources for their allergic children. Individuals empowered to speak up against injustice. Young professionals inspired to advocate for change. One letter, in particular, struck him deeply. It came from Emily, Leah's sister. In it, she expressed sorrow for the rift that had formed within her family and hoped that someday healing might be possible. Caleb read the letter carefully. He understood that while justice had been served publicly, the private wounds were still raw and complex. Compassion, he realized, was part of the journey forward. At a national conference on disability rights, Caleb was invited to share the stage with representatives from the airline, advocacy groups, and government officials. The panel discussion focused on how individual actions could spur systemic reform. As Caleb spoke, he glanced at the diverse faces in the audience, people united by a shared commitment to equity and dignity. He thought back to the cramped, tense cabin of Flight 411 and the quiet power of standing firm. The ripple effect of that day was clear. Change was possible, but it required courage, persistence, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. For Caleb, the fight was far from over. But the path ahead was illuminated by the knowledge that even one person's stand could alter the course of many lives. The sun was setting over New Haven, casting a warm amber glow through the large windows of the conference hall. Caleb Harris stood at the podium, his figure calm and composed, yet beneath the surface was a steady current of determination and hope. The room was filled with people advocates, industry leaders, journalists, and those who had been touched by his story. It was a gathering unlike any Caleb had attended before, a testament to how far a single moment on Flight 411 had traveled. As he began to speak, Caleb's voice carried the weight of experience but also the lightness of conviction. This journey started with a simple request for a meal, one that was necessary for my survival. What happened on that flight was not just a failure of service, it was a failure of humanity. He paused, letting the words settle, but it has also been a catalyst, a call to action for all of us, to ensure that no one else faces the humiliation or danger that I endured, to build systems that respect and protect every individual's dignity. The audience listened intently, many nodding in agreement. The transformation from victim to advocate had given Caleb a unique voice, a voice that carried not only pain, but also a vision for a better future. Behind him, a large screen displayed images from the incident, screenshots of Amelia Park's viral posts, excerpts from the public apology issued by Marcus Allen, and photos of the newly launched Harris-Allen Accord. Caleb reflected on the path that had brought him here. The confrontation with Leah Morgan, the tension with the purser Mark Lewis, the unexpected intervention from Marcus, and the eventual turning back of the plane, it had all seemed overwhelming at the time. Yet, out of that chaos had emerged something powerful, a movement that challenged complacency and demanded change. After his speech, Caleb stepped down and mingled with the crowd. He was greeted warmly, praised not just for his courage but for his humility. People shared stories of their own struggles, of moments when they too had faced injustice. Caleb's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Allen flashed on the screen. "Great speech. This is just the beginning." Smiling, Caleb pocketed the phone. The partnership with Marcus had proven invaluable. Together, they had leveraged power and influence not for personal gain but to lift others. Meanwhile, back at Skyline Airways, the company was deep into restructuring its training and policies. The Harris-Allen Accord had funded state-of-the-art programs designed to root out bias and build empathy among staff. Medical accommodations were streamlined and prioritized. Leah Morgan's lawsuit had finally been dismissed. The court ruled in favor of the airline, emphasizing the clear breach of duty and the overwhelming evidence against her. The legal defeat was a bitter blow, but it also marked a definitive turning point. In a quiet apartment far from the noise, Leah sat alone, contemplating the consequences of her actions. The loss of career, family ties, and reputation weighed heavily. It was a reckoning she could never avoid. Yet, even in her isolation, there was room for reflection. The world had moved on, but the lessons remained. For Caleb, the fight was ongoing but hopeful. He continued to advocate for people with allergies and disabilities, working to expand the reach of the Accord and partnering with organizations worldwide. His personal life flourished as well. Surrounded by family and friends, Caleb found peace in the knowledge that his struggle had created a safer, more respectful world for those who followed. One evening, as he looked out over the city skyline from his office window, Caleb thought about the invisible barriers that so often divide us, the assumptions we make, the biases we carry. He knew that dismantling them required more than policy changes. It required empathy, and empathy, he believed, was the true path forward. The story of Flight 411 was not just about a meal denied or a flight turned back. It was about the courage to stand for what is right, the power to bring about change, and the enduring hope for a more just world. As Caleb prepared for another day of advocacy and leadership, he carried with him the quiet strength that had seen him through the turbulence, a strength born not of anger, but of unwavering conviction and compassion. The skies were wide open now, and so was the future. This story of Skyline Airways Flight 411 is more than a tale of a denied meal or a flight turned back. It is a powerful reminder of the quiet battles fought every day against prejudice and the cost of turning a blind eye to injustice. Caleb Harris's Courage in the Face of Dismissiveness calls us all to reflect on how we treat others, whether in the skies, the boardroom, or everyday life. Discrimination, even when subtle, chips away at dignity and safety. Leah Morgan's downfall shows the heavy price of letting bias rule our actions. But this story also shines a light on hope, the hope that accountability, empathy, and systemic change can transform pain into progress. As we close this chapter, let it inspire you to stand firm for respect and humanity in your own world. Together, we can create a future where no one is silenced, ignored, or endangered because of who they are. If this story touched your heart, please like, share with your community, and subscribe to our channel to stay connected. More compelling stories about justice, courage, and truth await you here. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.